recording.
Okay. All right. Hi, guys. This track here, this is a simulation of what we have in the Charlestown Pier House in Charlestown. This is pretty much exactly the same angle as to what the sections of steel are that are in the Pier House cellar. So the issue regarding this section of steel here was that when it was fabricated, we had two 12mm holes through this side plate, and we had a 13mm hole through the main end frame, and it was located together with two 10mm bolts. So when Richard applied a load, for whatever reason I don't understand, because we've done this system before, we got slippage. So in effect what happened was that section moved up because the bolt was smaller than the two holes, and the track ended up turning down. And my solution was to put two 12mm holes through the bolt, through these holes, two 12mm bolts, which would effectively take up all the slack within the system. Richard's solution, and felt very strongly, apart from the two 12mm bolts, was to put these section of plate on the top, which I have now welded on so we can see what the benefit otherwise is of these plates. There is one thing I need you to take a look at in this configuration is, you have the end frame sitting here, you've got a section of track, you've got a hoist, and you've got a cable which always runs to the front. So effectively, that's what's taking the load. So what we need to ask is, if there's any benefit to the plate being on that frame, it should be able to support itself without any bolts. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to undo this section, and I'm going to show what happens to this area here without any bolts. If the plate worked, the section will not fall off. If the section falls off, the plate is doing nothing. Okay, so now the hoist has been removed from the track, and we're back to square one. Everything's been taken away from here. So what you've got now is literally what you'd have in Cornwall with no bolts, and you've still got this plate on that Richard's welded. So that's where we're at this moment. Okay? Okay, so now what we've got on here is a 25 kilo weight of steel, and I'm now going to release this catch here, and we'll see what happens, whether the plates at the top take the load. If the theory is correct, this track should stay where it is because these plates are taking the load. Kids, don't do this at home. So we can see that what's happened is effectively the same as what happened with the bolts. In essence, these plates that are being applied here do not offer any support at all to the track. The load is being taken by the bolt. Now, there may be some arguments in the sense of whether there's any compression between the plates on this section here, but in effect, it is the bolt that's taking the load. So the issue then was whether or not a 10mm bolt will take the shear load of this weight that's been applied. I estimate an 18-gallon cask is around about 110 kilos, including the hoist and the track. The maximum load on that whole section is going to be around about 150 kilos. And it's being applied to two bolts on three different end frames. My understanding is that the shear strength capacity, or the shear capacity of a 10mm bolt, 8.8 grade, is 2.2 ton. And it's lift taking, and there's two of them. Now, there are calculations used which redefine the capacity on the basis of how big the holes are, how big the sections of plates are, blah, blah, blah. But in essence, I don't believe for a second you're going to get from 2.2 ton down to 110 kilos. So what I'm now going to do is, I'm going to put this back in place. Okay, so that's a 10mm bolt. That's a 12mm bolt. That's a 6mm bolt. Now, to put it in perspective, I don't know what the shear strength of a 6mm bolt is, but if we looked at the the area of that bolt as a 10 mil and we made it 100. We just pretend it's 100. A 12 millimeter bolt is 150 and a 6 millimeter bolt is only 38. So it's got about 38% of the diameter of that steel is 38% the diameter of that. So I'm going to test this bolt to be able to take 100 kilos, one bolt. Okay, so this arrangement now, what you've got is you have 100 kilos of weight, obviously with your cradle and your hoist. So this is as near as possible as we can find to get to an 18-gallon cask. There's no bolts at all in this arrangement except for one 6 millimeter bolt which we looked at earlier on. So this is an M6 8.8 grade. So I'm going to lift up the weights, and in theory, if this takes the weight, it proves that the M6 is capable of taking in shear capacity. There's nothing supporting that except for the bolt. So we're going to lift it up, drop it down, lift it up. It does look a little bit wonky, simply because of the arrangement we have with the bench. You'll just have to forgive us in that. The issue is whether the bolt snaps. Okay, so now we've got an M6 bolt taking the weight of 100 kilos, plus the hoist and everything else. Guys, I would wager if I left that there for the night and came back tomorrow morning, that bolt will still be sound and it will not be on the ground. An M6 bolt, one M6 bolt, will take the weight. I've got nothing else to prove. Thank you. Okay, so that's the exact bolt that was taking the weight, and other than little score marks on it from compression, no damage to the bolt. Thank you.